If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we shall unravel the mysteries behind the origins, motives, and culture of an obscure bloodline in the world of darkness. This episode will focus on the Children of Danu, the Danava. Faith and religion have perpetuated kindred society for thousands of years and still continues to do so tonight. Whether it is the Koldons and Lianan and their ties to paganism, the Assamites' dedication to Islam and Muslim traditions, or the Lasombras' ode association with the Catholic Church, many of our kind have sought some higher purpose as an anchor for our degrading humanity. Of course, being descendants of Cain, our blood and the beast within has ways of corrupting what we touch, which is something I find myself saying a lot to you recently. For example, paganism from a mortal perspective does not usually govern or encourage the need for human sacrifices, and yet the Lianan practice it. The Setites and children of Osiris worship Set and Osiris respectively, but we both know that these become more like cults than what one could consider a true religion. But then again, aren't all religions some deviations on what we could consider cults? I am going somewhere with this, child, so wake up, you impatient swine! Both mortal and Cainite adopt ideologies and beliefs from religion to ascend to some higher plane of spiritual enlightenment. A fair few individuals believe they are chosen by their gods to go beyond the mortal frame and become even greater. You may think such individuals as delusional, but such is the mindset of the Danava, a bloodline of the Ventru clan that is centered around the Indian subcontinent, whose distinction from their western cousins is defined by the caste system, rather than just being Indian blue bloods. But how did the Ventru find themselves in India? Well, let us explore that by visiting the Ventru origin story and see if we can find any clues within. The origin story of the antediluvian is a remarkably simple one. Cain met a human of exceptional intelligence, magnetism, and proficiency. One account states that Cain got one of his child, presumably Enoch, to embrace the mortal, who is said to be the first antediluvian by their records. The Tzimisce would argue their antediluvian, the eldest, was the first third-generation vampire, but we have already discussed this in great detail before. The other account would suggest that Enoch embraced him without Cain's blessing, which I find more likely, as many of the third generation were embraced like this. In any case, Cain would assign Ventru as his seneschal, his personal advisor, to rule the second city in his stead. Some would say the antediluvian also had a hand in building the second city as well. With the second city firmly established, presumably with Ventru ruling the helm, he and the majority of the antediluvians would partake in the slaughtering of the second generation, with each guilty antediluvian receiving a curse that would be passed down from every child thereafter. I like to mock the Ventru by saying they are extremely picky eaters, but they would tell you that they have exacting and rarefied tastes. Whatever the mindset, they can only feed on a certain group of individuals such as brunette men, epileptic children, or black women. A Ventru will not feed on any other type of blood, not even if they are starving or under duress. If a Ventru would feed on another type of blood, then they would still not be nourished by that blood. This being said, I have heard tales of a Ventru being able to change their feeding habits, requiring large chunks of their willpower to do so. A vampire may feed on vampiric vitae, however, with no restrictions. They don't gain sustenance from animals either. These feeding restrictions also apply to the Danava, but with a slight twist I will elaborate later. I have stated many times during our discussion regarding the clan histories that the Malkavians and Ventru played large parts in the building the grand empire that was Rome. Between the fall of the second city and the rise of Rome, the Ventru Methuselahs toyed with how one could effectively dominate and conquer empires. They established great cities, either taking the spotlight as god kings or behind-the-scene puppeteers. Many took the former, as the concept of the Masquerade was embryonic at best and non-existent at worst. Times were simpler then, which allowed them to experiment and expand their empires freely with next to no consequence. This would naturally lead to their conflict with the kindred of Carthage, fronted by Clan Bruja. We have explored many times what happened there, so do not expect me to revisit that in great detail. Just revisit your notes if you want the long story of the Ventrus' victory. Rome would also fall, which you know, resulting in pockets of Camilla's allies fighting amongst themselves as he fell into torpor. The socio-political structures of Camilla would soon be adopted by other Ventu and some of the other princes of other clans. This system would be the baby steps that would form the Camarilla some many years later. With the fall of the Roman Empire, a fair amount of the Ventu that dominated there would scatter, taking their traditions and ways of doing things elsewhere, which is where one can assume they embedded themselves in Indian culture with the Brahmin, the Ravno bloodline that championed that domain. Those who have a passing interest in the Danava would tell you that it was Vadartha, the sire of Mithras and alleged founder of the Road of Kings, is the Danava progenitor. Some Danuva claim him as their founder and believe they are the original Ventru. Such mindsets are in the minority, and Danava who believe this are considered to be Danuva anti-tribu. I won't deny that there is probably some element of truth there, hence my previous ramblings, but there is more to the Danava than being just Indian Ventru. The Danava have their own origin stories, although they are more origin theories than anything else. The Danava naturally detached themselves from the Blue Bloods, claiming that they were in India before any other breed of Cainite, meaning they would inherently hold the most power in the continent, which is a terribly Ventru thing to say if you think about it. Anyway, many Danava insist they are Children of Danu, occasionally referred to as Asura, a primordial goddess in Hinduism who is said to reside in the primeval waters. In Balinese Hinduism, Danu is referred to as Dewi Danu, the water goddess and one of the two supreme deities in the Balinese tradition. These children of Danu believe they are gods. Others know Danu as the mother of Vitra, the demonic serpent slain by Indra, and believe they are Asura, stone demons bound in human form. This would cause some conflict in 1242, with followers of the Asura origin hunting Methuselahs and elders that advocated the Deva origin and vice versa. But regardless of mindset, each child of Danu prayed to their deities, wanting to transcend their mortal frame, achieving their divine birthright through dedicated prayer and the brutalities of sadhana, which replaces the discipline of presence. The Danuva also have dominate and fortitude. We discussed sadhana in brief detail before when I was approached by some Anarch Tremere whose name is but a fleeting memory, and they asked me about blood sorcery. Sadhana is blood magic that predates the Tremere's sorcery by thousands of years, practiced predominantly by the Danava, but some Setites practice this as well, in addition to the Brahmin Ravno line and a handful of Salubri watchers. On the surface, sadhana functions almost identically to the thaumaturgy of the Tremere. Some of its paths are similar, if not identical, to regular thaumaturgy, but they use different names. For example, movement of the mind becomes Rishi's hand, whilst spirit manipulation is referred to as Asura Raja. Advancing in blood sorcery is also how both breeds of Cainites advance their own hierarchies. However, there are some colossal differences between the application and the mindset behind them, which in turn acts as some of the largest foundations to the culture of the Danuva. The Tremere see their magic as a discipline in the strictest sense. With dedicated study and research, the Warlock is able to improve and become a better and stronger member of House Tremere. Where Danu differ massively is that their magic is a holy practice, meaning it's taught differently as well. Rather than one's understanding of the occult, their theology is tested, questioning their faith and understanding of karma. The Danuva believe drinking blood inculates prana, which, in its most basic definition, is a life force all levels, including inanimate objects, so it's like chi in a sense. This warped definition of prana fuels their use of sadhana, their blood sorcery, using it to rule India as self-proclaimed priest kings. They would prefer the title sadhu, meaning ascetic holy man. Remember this term, for I shall be using it again tonight. Sadhana demands grueling austerities as one progresses further along with the understanding of the discipline. Each child of Danu prays to multiple deities, making sacrifices or rituals as and when needed, which bears some resemblance to the Liabon and their understanding of disciplines. It is not a perk of the blood per se, but a literal gift from the gods. It is not performed through pleasure or on a whim, as does not one perform mantras, or sacrifices willy-nilly. It is treated seriously, as is the Children of Danu's fasting to the point of torpor, extended yoga over several weeks, and exposure to fire whilst resisting Rashek. As such, you wouldn't be surprised to find Danava of the Dark Ages following the road of kings or heaven. Fledgling Danava are quickly converted into the mindset of being the offspring of Danu, ceremoniously abandoning their former humanity. The need to perform rituals upon the using of this discipline also carries over to their feeding. Like their Western cousins, the Children of Danu have feeding preferences. Unlike the Ventru, the Danava cannot slake their thirst with animal blood, as is customary with their religious beliefs. You seem frightened. Probably because of your grip on humanity and lack of culture. It is understandable, but don't get too comfortable, because there are more thaumaturgical paths available to the Sadhu: the power of blood nectar and the power of karma. The power of blood nectar is treated as a distillation of Amria, the nectar of divinity, an elixir of immortality. Through the drinking of one's veins, a mortal, ghoul, or kindred can temporarily gain the measure of the Sadhu's supernatural strength. What I mean is that one can temporarily possess the disciplines animalism, auspex, chemistry, fortitude, potence, or sadhana, excluding the power of blood nectar. Now you may be asking, why these exact disciplines? Well, they are shared across the Salubri, Ravno, and Danava in some form or another, and they cannot teach what they don't naturally know. The path of karma, on the other hand, is a more exotic use of some auspex powers, allowing one to discern the truth in a target's past and future, with some powers within this path dictating one's future, literally deciding it for them. I once found myself in the domain of Mangaluru, in great conversation with Akian, a 7th generation Danava, who demonstrated his understanding in the path, turning someone into a wraith upon death. He made me aware that someone with this power could use it to turn the recently deceased into a Wankwe, which is just bizarre. Frightening, but bizarre. As powerful as they appear to be, they are not impervious to the influence and dangers of the outside world. When the Muslims and the accompanying Ashira arrived in India in 1001, the Danava who were not part of the Tamahira surrendered themselves to the Ashira or fled into remote hill lands. In case you have forgotten, the Ashira are a vampiric sect ruled by Islamic vampires who thus declare their faith in Allah. Whether the Danava fled or swallowed up by the Ashira, the Children of Danu watched the sect being obliterated by the Mongols, the Anda that protected them, and the Kwajin that accompanied them. Since this time, an uneasy truce between Kwajin, Ashira, and the native Danava evolved, which allowed a delicate coexistence between the otherwise hostile supernaturals. The Danava, Datya, a bunch of heretical Setites, and the other Cainite Sadhu saw the chance to push out the Ashira when the Tremere established their first chantry in 1829, in India I mean. Both sides cooperated, along with several Ashira neonates that wanted to strike back at their elders and sires. Their chance came during the Sepoy Mutiny, the major but ultimately unsuccessful uprising in India in 1857 to 1858 against the rule of the British East India Company. The British pushed back the Muslim revolts into the Tremere, as well as their Hindu and Muslim allies, in addition to destroying numerous Ashira princes. Now, if memory serves me correct, child, the result was a stalemate, with kindred with backgrounds in Jati as well. The Ashira would hold several territories as well, Kwajin and Camarilla claiming domains of themselves also. What's Jati? I know you didn't ask, neonate, but you should have done. Jati is Indian for caste or subcaste. Both definitions are appropriate here to describe how the Danava live their own lives. The Children of Danu live by India's caste systems, as they once did as mortals, stating that the Brahmins were at the top, consisting of teachers and priests, followed by Kastriyas, warriors and rulers. Beneath them were Fashyas, who were made up of farmers, traders and merchants, with the Shudras making up labourers. Finally, there were Dalits, right at the bottom of the hierarchy. Obviously, as time would march on, these roles would manifest in roles to match the times, but what wouldn't change is the Danava's mindset on the caste system. The Children of Danu follow the caste system on their country with extreme prejudice. Such structures are holy and correct to the Children of Danu, and to go against the divine order is truly unthinkable. They embrace those of the Brahmin caste, with occasional ventures in the Vaishya caste. The other caste system they follow is the one of their own bloodlines. For example, the Assamites have their own castes: warrior, vizier, and sorcerer. The Salubri do too, which are watcher, healer, and warrior, with the watcher dividing itself further between thief and scholar subcastes. In India, vampires generally divide themselves into castes, roughly along clan lines. The Daitya, Danava, Salubri, and Malkavians are considered Brahmin. Assamites, Bruja, and Zamitsi are considered Kshatriya. Nosferatu and Gangrel are Shudra, and Toreadors are Dalits. Normally, these clans only embrace mortals of their own caste, but exceptions do occur. Only the Ravno are spread across multiple castes. As self-proclaimed descendants of an actual god, the Danava appear undeniably regal, as does their havens. They are easily mistaken as temples for gods, either using said holy places as their havens or having havens very close to them. After all, what use is a priest-king with no one to guide? Whether they are children of a god or something else entirely, it cannot be denied the power they wield in their dedication to their faiths and beliefs are some of the sturdiest and frightening in our little organization. Whilst not as inherently peaceful as the Children of Osiris, or manipulative as the followers of Set, the Danava are yet another example of Cainites who have taken a well-established mortal religion and have forced it into a strange macabre form that could only ever work for Scions of the Night, as they strive to find their own realization and acceptance of what they are, a vampire trying to overcome the beast to reach a higher plane of transcendence. All this talk of spiritual paramountcy sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it, Neonate? No? No? For fuck's sake, child, it's Golconda in another form! No, it is not a concept stolen from the Salubri. Salot achieved a transcendent spiritual state in the Indian city of Golconda, which falls within territory controlled by the Danava. Some even believe that the very notion of Golconda originated from the Danava, which may be a little worrying, consider what has been often speculated with the Salubri, and the fact that many of the Danava consider themselves to be demons. To be kept updated, follow the Lord by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.